A week ago, I began this sermon series by talking about humans being created in God's image. According to the author of Psalm 139, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. For Christians, that God created us defines who we are. Nothing else in our life defines us as much as our being God's marvelously unique creation. When some part of us falls ill, when we lose our vision, hearing, or memory, when our hair gets thin, when our skin begins to sag or has gotten wrinkled, when we struggle with our weight or appearance, when we develop anxiety, depression, or ADHD, those things do not ever fully define us. Let's go one step further this week and focus specifically on living with mental illnesses. Our guide for this week is the story of Jesus' healing of a demon-possessed man. Most healing stories in the Gospel center on physical afflictions, not mental illnesses. Jesus heals people who were living with skin rashes, paralysis, deafness, muteness, and epileptic seizures. But only on one occasion does he perform an exorcism on someone who may have been living with a mental illness. This, again, is how the story goes. Jesus and his disciples are traveling through the mostly Gentile territory called the Decapolis, southeast of the Sea of Galilee. Near the city of Gerasa, a man can we go back to the sermon slide? Not that yet. Near the city of Gerasa, a man dashes down the hillside toward the lakeshore. He lives in the local cemetery, away from the community of the living. He wears no clothes. His body is caked with dirt, his hair is a tangled mess, and his wrists and ankles are bound by iron cuffs attached to chains that he has broken. As the man approaches, the crowd parts and scatters. But Jesus remains in place and greets the man. The man drops to the ground, begging not to be tormented. Jesus then asks him, "What is your name?" "Legion," the man says, for he is plagued by many voices in his head. The voices beg to be let go. After ordering the demon to leave the body of the man, Jesus permits the demon to enter a herd of swine. And that's how we know also that this is Gentile territory. Jews wouldn't have a herd of swine. So those poor tormented swines end up hauling themselves off a cliff and drown in the waters of the lake. The healed man appears to have been gifted clothes by someone and now sits calmly in his right mind near Jesus. The people of Gerasa are both frightened by Jesus' power and they are upset for having lost 2,000 pieces of livestock because of Jesus. No wonder that the now healed man is worried about his own future among them. Instead of remaining among his own people, he hopes to join Jesus' group and leave the area. Jesus, however, refuses and asks the man to remain in his hometown and proclaim what God has done for him and what mercy God has shown him. Subsequently, the man becomes a preacher among his mostly Gentile people. Do you ever wonder what exact condition the man suffered from? We really don't know for sure, and here's why. First, we need to keep in mind that mental illnesses are much harder to diagnose than most physical illnesses. If you want to know, for example, whether or not a person has come down with shingles, for example, doctors can diagnose the illness and its causes. They can examine you physically, they can run tests, but it is more difficult to identify the causes and the symptoms of mental health challenges. Mental illnesses can develop from many different combinations of factors. For example, genetic predispositions, family history, traumatic events, poverty, patterns of thinking, even gastrointestinal disorders. The fact that mental illnesses are harder to diagnose than most physical illnesses can make diagnosing them tricky, since mental health professionals cannot rely on blood tests or x-rays. In essence, they do two things to diagnose their patients. They look at symptoms and listen to stories. So, the second reason that we really don't know what the man suffered from is that the modern medical discipline of psychiatry did not exist in first century Palestine. Instead, belief in demons was widespread, and what was called demon possession may in fact have been a mental illness from a modern point of view. On top of that, the Gospels give us very little information about this man, and the information they do provide is not medical in nature. For those two reasons, psychiatrists are unable to agree with each other on the man's condition. Some suggest that the man experienced an acute episode of mania. Others suggest that he was living with schizophrenia or trauma. Others yet diagnose him with a dissociative identity disorder. Ultimately, we do not know what condition it was that the man suffered from. What we do know, however, is this. The story is not told to serve as either a faith healing manual or as a manual for exorcising demons. The story is not told to instruct us in the art of faith healing or exorcism. In fact, the story is not about us at all, but about Jesus. This story is told to demonstrate the unique authority Jesus possesses as the Son of God. An authority that he uses to heal people from distressing symptoms and to restore isolated and suffering people to their community. In the case of the shackled man from Gerasa, Jesus looks the man in the eye, wants to know his name, makes him well, and then enables him to return to his community. The story illustrates Jesus' commitment to welcome stigmatized and outcast people and bring healing to their lives. Let's go one step further in interpreting this story. When reading any biblical story, readers must pay equally close attention to what is said and what is not said in that story. In this case, we do hear that Jesus initiates a conversation with a man. We hear that he heals the man from his condition, and we hear Jesus instruct the man to return to his own community. That's what we are being told. But what is it that is not said in this story? Nowhere in the story does Jesus speculate why this man became possessed by a powerful demon, or whether the man did anything wrong for the demon to be able to enter into and get hold of the man's body. Nowhere does Jesus suggest that the man must have led a sinful life and that the man must have had an inadequate faith in God. All we hear is that Jesus has empathy with the man's torment and isolation, that he comes to his aid and orders the demon to leave the man's body, and that the man has been made well in the end. So what can we learn from this story? First, we can learn that Jesus, the Son of God, operated within the scientific and medical worldview of his own era. That worldview did not yet include modern scientific and medical knowledge. For us 21st century people, we also must operate within the scientific and medical worldview of the era in which we live. That means we ought to consider the modern medical diagnostic tools and treatment options as gifts from God. God has given us the insights of modern medicine and psychiatry so that we use them for the betterment of people. Second, we can learn from Jesus that we must not speculate about the causes of another person's mental illness. We must never declare that a person's mental illness has been caused by God as a form of punishment for their sin. That may seem very trivial, and you may wonder, are we doing this? There are a lot of Christians out there that actually do that. We must also never attribute someone's persistent mental challenges to their inadequate faith or broken relationship with God. Must never tell them, you didn't pray hard enough, otherwise you would be healed, right? Finally, we can learn from Jesus' commitment to welcome stigmatized people. We can learn from Jesus how to reach out in love and compassion to people living with mental health challenges. As 21st century people, we no longer view mental illness as caused by demon possession, but by a variety of contributing genetic, social, physical, cognitive factors and traumatic experiences. Those contributing factors are complex and differ from person to person. The more we, therefore, educate ourselves about the variety of mental illnesses that people might suffer from, the better will we be equipped to serve as God's agents of love, to welcome and support them as individuals. Mental illnesses vary greatly in symptoms and severity. According to the DSM-5, the standard manual of mental disorders used by mental health professionals in the United States, there are over 20 different classes of disorders. Some of the most common include substance-related and addictive disorders, mood-related disorders, anxiety and fear-related disorders, trauma and stress-related disorders, depressive disorders, obsessive-compulsive disorders, psychotic disorders, and eating disorders. Each of these categories in turn is further subdivided into many more precise diagnoses. For example, anxiety-related disorders include generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social anxiety disorder, and other conditions. In other words, simply hearing that someone has a mental illness doesn't give us enough information or insight into their actually lived experience. Diagnoses and labels don't help us to truly appreciate people as individuals, each with their own unique experiences and unique challenges. Let's take a quick look at two specific and fairly common disorders to further illustrate this point: generalized anxiety disorder and bipolar I disorder. And Daryl, I'm traipsing here on thin ice. Yeah, you're the expert. Let's begin with generalized anxiety disorder. The condition is characterized by overwhelming anxiety that manifests itself physically and psychologically. Symptoms can include worry, inability, irritability, restlessness, difficulty concentrating, sleep disturbances, muscle tension, fatigue, and nausea. Individuals with generalized anxiety disorder experience symptoms on most days, and symptoms are present for at least 6 months. In contrast, bipolar I disorder is a condition that manifests as alternating episodes of depression and elevated mood, known as mania. Depressive symptoms can include sleeping too much or too little, weight gain or loss, reduced interest in activities, and feelings of worthlessness or guilt. Symptoms of mania can include elevated or irritable mood, inflated self-esteem, grandiose schemes, a decreased need for sleep, reckless purchases, racing thoughts, reckless behavior, and psychosis. On average, individuals with bipolar I disorder experience 4 episodes over the course of 10 years, so not constant. As you can tell from these brief descriptions, experiences of mental illnesses vary widely. Some people live with symptoms every day, while others may be symptom-free for months or years between episodes. Mental illness can look like insomnia or stress, or it can look like extreme changes in mood and psychosis. In the end, genuinely listening to someone's story is the only way to understand their own unique experience of mental illness. And now let's turn to the next slide. So much for that. Let me ask you in closing, what do all people who are living with mental illness have in common? No matter what the condition they are suffering from, and whether they are languishing or flourishing while living with their illness, God is there. God is always there, always present with them, and always sustains them, whether they are able to see this or not.